It's been over a year since Games Workshop dropped their last Crusade book, Pariah Nexus, and since then a ton has changed. Every army has multiple detachments, actions are back, and more than half the game's codexes have been released, so we were overdue for a new set of Crusade rules. Cue Nachmund Gauntlet, the latest Crusade book, which gives us a host of new rules and ways to play our narrative games of Warhammer 40,000. I'm reformed narrative sicko Campbell McLaughlin, and today I'll be giving you the Goonhammer review of Crusade Nachmund Gauntlet. Before we get to that though, we'd like to thank Games Workshop for providing us with a preview copy of this book for review purposes. We're not going to cover every single agenda, battle trait, and so on in this video because if we do, we'll be here till the next Crusade book. Instead, you can check those out in our written companion to this video on goonhammer.com. Link in the description. First off, the basics. Creating and maintaining your Crusade force remains largely unchanged from the core rulebook and Crusade Tyrannic War, beyond a couple of cosmetic additions to track Blackstone fragments. The rules for gaining and spending requisition points are unchanged, and all the standard requisitions are back. Similarly, battle traits and battle scars are earned and removed in the same way, and the generic weapon modification and battle scar tables here are exactly what you're used to. If you are looking for a more lightweight alternative to Crusade, I'm afraid you won't find it here. Nachmund Gauntlet makes some huge changes to how games are played. Forget skill trees and tracking campaign-specific doohickeys, these are actual substantial differences from your garden variety games of Warhammer. These battles have a number of new rules which change how you'll build armies, how they arrive on the battlefield, and what you'll be doing in your games. The biggest and most effective change is to tactical reserves, and every game in Nachmund Gauntlet uses them. Your army will be split up into smaller forces called waves, and as with SCA, there are only 3 waves that matter. The first is the primary wave, the main part of your army which you deploy on the battlefield at the start of the game, and you'll add 2 or 3 reinforcement waves which are set up later in the battle. The way this is set up, you'll only ever bring in 2 of your reinforcement waves, so while you can have 3, the idea is you'd choose which 2 to bring in, giving you some adaptability mid-battle to alter your strategy based on what you need. It's kind of a sideboard mechanic, which gives players an incentive to build out larger orders of battle and makes those situational units more relevant. The way you split your army up depends on the size of the battle and your formation stance, though this is just a fancy way of saying how many points you'll start with on the battlefield. You have 3 options per battle size, and they let you vary how much of your army is in the primary wave by plus or minus 100 points from half the game total. So for example, in a 2,000 point game, you can choose your primary wave to be either 900, 1,000, or 1,100 points. Your reinforcement waves will then be either 550, 500, or 450 points each, splitting the remainder in half. This is essentially a way to help armies which might otherwise have a hard time making exact point values work for certain game and wave sizes. Your primary wave is the only part of your army you'll deploy pre-game, deploying on the board as you'd expect, but with the caveat that you can't put primary wave units into reserves. Then, at the start of the second battle round, you'll pick which of your reinforcement waves to bring onto the table via strategic reserves. Then in round 3, you pick another wave to bring in, and any remaining waves don't take part in the battle. If your warlord was in a wave that didn't come onto the table, it counts as destroyed for the purposes of agendas and so on, but they don't take an out of action test. Finally, units in Nachmund Gauntlet battles cannot use the rapid ingress stratagem. Sorry, guess your ingresses weren't rapid enough. Another wrinkle in the Nachmund Gauntlet missions is surgical deep strike. Do you love deep striking into battle but struggle with having to be 9 inches away? Cursing fate as you fail the ensuing charge, being forced to sit and watch as your dreams turn to ash in your mouth? Well, in Nachmund Gauntlet, once per turn, a unit arriving via deep strike can do a surgical deep strike. This is a special kind of deep strike that allows units to be set up within 9 inches of an enemy unit and anywhere more than 3 inches from an enemy unit. When you do this, your unit has to take a deep strike test, rolling 2d6 and subtracting 1 for every enemy model within 9 inches of the unit, excluding battle shocked units and units with OC 0, of course. Roll a 4 up and you're good. Your unit arrives and can act normally this turn. Roll a 3 and you have to take a battle shock test. A 2? Oh, you're just plain battle shocked. Roll a 1 or less though? Buddy, you're in for it now. That's a deep strike mishap, and you get to roll on a totally new table. The deep strike mishap table isn't quite as draconian as mishaps of old, but it can still put a damper on your deep striking plans. You'll take some mortal wounds no matter what you roll, d3 for a result of 1 to 4, and a d6 for 5 up, and for most results you also end up battle shocked. Then there are other effects. On a 2, your unit goes back into reserves. The drop zone is just too dangerous. On a 4, one enemy unit within 9 inches can make a normal move of up to d6 inches as they anticipated your arrival. Roll a 6, absolute disaster. You can't shoot or charge this turn, and your Terminators are forced to stand there with their power-fisted thumbs up their bums. This is a cool system for dropping units in close. It rewards players who want to test their luck by dropping in a little bit closer, while also giving players a way to just go for it. The mishaps also offer some fun and thematic drawbacks without spiking your models straight into the dumpster like the old mishaps could. This threads the needle and really buffs deep strike units. Actions were absent in the Pariah Nexus Crusade book, but are back in Nachmund Gauntlet. Yes, Pariah Nexus is also the name of the current match play tournament companion, which is a totally different thing and totally confusing. Come on, GW, you've got more proper nouns than that. These updated actions work exactly like they do in Pariah Nexus tournament games. They can't be performed by units that are aircraft, battle-shocked, OC0, or in engagement range, they can't have fallen back or advanced, and they must be eligible to shoot that phase. Titanic characters can still do them so long as they don't charge and only do a single one. We're happy to see them codified here instead of the kind of loosey-goosey pseudo-actions we had before. Finally, there's one more major change to games played in Nachmund Gauntlet. During any given game, the first player to get 10 or more victory points gets the strategic advantage. The only victory points that count towards this are the ones you get from progressive objectives and not endgame objectives or being battle ready. When a player gets the strategic advantage, the game ends at the end of that battle round. This kind of sudden death move is pretty bonkers, and it represents the first time we've seen a rule like this in 10th edition. It's also easy to miss if you aren't paying attention as you read through the game sequence section. To compensate for this, missions in Nachmund Gauntlet tend to be pretty low scoring. As an example, Frontline Warfare puts 6 objectives on the table with 4 in No Man's Land, and players score 1 victory point for controlling an objective in No Man's Land, plus 2 for controlling the one in their opponent's deployment zone. That means most of the time it'll be unlikely a game ends before round 4. That said, this first to 10 structure gives the player going first a considerable advantage, and there are more than a few missions where the attacker gets to choose who goes first. This should get mitigated by the tactical reserves and surgical deep strike rules. Starting with only half your army on the board will make it harder to spread out and control everything early, and being able to drop in close in a pinch can stop you from losing a game, even if the risk is high. But even with those changes, we suspect that Horde armies like the Imperial Guard and Genestealer cults will have a natural advantage on these missions, and even Space Marine infiltrators may cause problems. As with the prior 2 campaign books, Nachmund Gauntlet introduces us to a whole host of new agendas. A load of these are what you'd expect, largely matching up to older agendas, requiring you to do actions, kill specific units, or be on specific places on the battlefield. Where they vary in Nachmund is that, as with Pariah Nexus, they're pretty well integrated into the campaign rules. The big change here is that agendas are how you score strategic asset points for your team. Typically, this is done by going above and beyond. For example, Cut Off the Head is your classic Assassinate agenda, giving you 2 experience points per character kill. But if you manage to kill the enemy warlord, you'll score a strategic asset point for your team too. This is a cool way to make the agendas more meaningful. They don't just determine your experience points, but they also help you drive campaign victory, even if you don't win your game. It's a cool way to make players feel like they're contributing to the greater campaign and give players alternative goals for their games, something agendas don't really do when they just give you experience points. There's also extra agendas here specific to attackers and defenders, and some that are tied to your army faction, which is a nice touch. Nachmund gives us the most involved set of Crusade blessings yet in one of these books, and that's a good thing. In addition to 6 standard Crusade blessings, there are also 3 each for attacker and defender, and 1 based on your army's faction. This is a cool change of pace, and they're all pretty solid, and several interact with the new deep strike rules. Like the other books, we get a new set of generic battle traits to work with for different unit types. There are tables you might expect covering monsters and vehicles and infantry, but there are extra sets for fast units, beasts, jump packs, mounted, and deep strike units. These are usually little things, like rerolling 1s to wound units on objectives or free use of a specific stratagem, but a bunch are structured around the new deep strike rules. They really want you using those, so why not oblige them? The battle scars list from the Tyrannic War and Pariah Nexus books has been replicated here with the same 6 options: crippling damage, battle weary, fatigued, disgraced, mark of shame, and deep scars. As a 35-year-old man, I've collected all 6. Likewise, the same weapon mods are back here too. It's kind of a shame compared to all the new battle traits, but there's only so many ways you can duct tape a scope to a gun without overcomplicating things. This ain't Necromunda. Oh, but we're at Necromunda. The book has your standard spread of Crusade relics divided into Artificer, Antiquity, and Legendary relics. There are a lot of these, and they add some cool new options for armies to pick from. Some of them are simple but fun, like the Conversion Field, which gives you a 5-up invuln save, and it lets you bounce back mortal wounds when you roll a 6, and then there's more involved ones, like Lyreth's Mirror, which lets you do some out-of-phase shooting or charging against newly arrived units. Some of these might be a little wonky balance-wise, but you're playing Crusade. Lean into it. With the new Crusade book comes a new campaign setting for groups to build their overarching stories around. Tyrannic War gave us a campaign focused on hunting monsters, with skill trees for units to unlock. Structurally, there wasn't much to it, not really much in the way of glutinous biomass holding your games together. It was just games loosely strung together. Pariah Nexus gave us a more structured campaign framework, centered around collecting doodads, in that case Blackstone fragments, and it added strategic footing as a way to devise pre-game plans and make the roles of attacker and defender matter a bit more. But Pariah Nexus was still more of a backdrop than a proper campaign. Enter Sangua Terra, Blood Earth. Enter Sangua Terra, the Nachmund Gauntlet campaign. And this one is an actual campaign! Nachmund campaigns are split into 3 phases and have rules for player alliances, handing out rewards based on victories scored each phase and assigning campaign victory points to determine a winner. It's ostensibly a location-based campaign, though not a map-based one, focusing on the war to conquer Sangua Terra's capital city. Sorry, fellow map campaign perverts, this is the best we got. Nachmund Gauntlet campaigns recommend having a game master to run things and advise assigning a war master for each alliance. That's a good shout, as there's a lot to track and you'll want your most invested narrative sickos running your teams. Those teams of players are called alliances. You can run with 2 or 3 of these, though Nachmund recommends 3: Guardians, Despoilers, and Marauders. These are meant to loosely map onto Imperium, Chaos, and the Xenos grab bag, though game masters are encouraged to build teams however makes sense. If you wanted to tell a more involved story, you could absolutely assign your local Eldar player to join the Imperials on the Guardian side or whatever. There's even a note in here that these are guidelines, not hard rules. Over the course of 3 separate phases of the campaign, your 3 alliances will attempt to seize control of 4 strategic sites that can give your alliance powerful bonuses if they're both in control of these locations and they've secured the position, aka they've reached control level 3. We'll get there in a second. The book recommends that Nachmund phases last 2 weeks if players are playing 1 game per week, with every player playing 2 games, but you can adapt these rules to playing over a weekend or going even longer. In a Nachmund campaign, alliances fight to control locations called strategic sites. There are 4 of these in Sangua Terra, and at the start of the campaign, all alliances have a control level of 0 for each site. As the campaign goes on and alliances win their games at those sites, they'll increase their control presence, maxing out at a control level of 7. Scoring battle points increases your control level over locations, bringing your alliance 1 step closer to victory, which is done in secret. Higher control values gives you a bonus to your campaign victory points, and they give you extra in-game and roster bonuses. You can also earn strategic asset points from the agendas in this book. Those are also secretly assigned to one of the 4 sites. These points go towards scoring your alliance's strategic goals, which are chosen secretly by your team's war master at the start of each campaign phase. Those goals, if met, will not only affect your control levels of these strategic sites, but possibly your opponents as well. You'll also gain campaign victory points whenever you increase your control of a site to levels 2 and 5, with even more awarded to the alliance holding any given strategic site. These campaign victory points are, as you'd expect from the name, the key to winning the campaign. There are only 12 possible points to go around, with control of the most strategic sites acting as a tiebreaker. With only 4 sites, if the sides are still tied, then you move on to the next tiebreaker, strategic asset points. Still tied? Well, you could try battle points, but ultimately you've ended up at a stalemate. An unsatisfying draw in my Warhammer story? It's more likely than you think. Not so secretly, as both the book and us at Goonhammer recommend, you're really going to want to have a campaign master involved to keep track of these secret results and who currently has control of which site and has all the cool bonuses. The best way to do that is with Goonhammer's very own Administratum, the premier campaign and roster management tool for tabletop wargames. And yes, we'll be implementing support for Sangua Terra campaigns pretty soon. The 4 strategic sites in Sangua Terra aren't just dots on a map. They actually have an effect on your games, which your alliance can gain when they take control of each one. The Perfectus Bastion lets you muster up to 4 reinforcement waves instead of the 3 everyone else gets. You can still only deploy 2 of them in a game, but having an extra option rewards having a bigger roster and can help you react to tough matchups. Controlling the Emperor's Voiced Grand Battery means you deal D3 mortal wounds to enemy units arriving from strategic reserves on a 5-up. It won't win you the game, but with the Tactical Reserves rules, you'll have a few opportunities to ping a few models in every game. The Tower of Murmuration gives your alliance an extra strategic goal to strive for, and at the end of that campaign phase, your team's War Master gets to choose which one of the 2 strategic goals to discard. Rounding them out is the Akrendor Spaceport. Should you control this site, your alliance's players can perform up to 2 surgical deep strikes a turn. You can also, once per turn, reroll a unit's deep strike test. Given this supplement's focus on deep strikes, this is the most exciting of the lot. We can see a lot of groups tussling over the spaceport and the Grand Battery, as those seem like the most powerful, but the more canny alliances will see that and they'll pick up the tower or bunker for a song early on. From there, they have more options to score specific strategic goals and score certain agendas, making it easier for them to seize control of the other sites. At the start of each campaign phase, your alliance's War Master will secretly choose one of 5 strategic goals for their team, revealing the chosen goal to their team and the campaign master only. Each goal has different requirements, which need your alliance to complete strategic asset points by completing agendas in each battle that campaign phase. These strategic asset points can then be secretly assigned to a strategic site to improve the alliance's control. There are 5 strategic goals available for each phase, of which 3 are locked to a particular alliance, which is a nice thematic bonus. These tend to focus on how you interact with and allocate these points to strategic sites, changing your control level at the end of each phase. As your team plays games, they'll score strategic asset points through a mix of game wins and achieving agendas, and at the end of each phase, you'll determine control based on where those points were allocated and whether you achieved your team goal. At the end of each campaign phase, the veil of secrecy is torn away, the dust settles, and the campaign master gets their 5 minutes of fame by revealing the current standings for each strategic site. Starting with the alliance with the highest overall battle points, they increase their control levels of each site depending on how they split their battle points between those sites after each game. Then, alliances reveal their goals and modify control, leading to a final score. It's a complicated process, but it's done this way so control of each site and its powerful bonus goes to the alliance that gets to control level 3 first. After that, alliances can only claim control, and the bonus, by having a higher control level for a site. The oddest addition of this book is the Mighty Champions section. These are rules for adding and using epic heroes in your Crusade missions, in part to represent the historical nature of the campaign. We're not going to go into the lore here, but characters like Harkin Worldclaimer and Saint Celestine are major parts of it. Adding an epic hero ups your Crusade point total by 1, which, good, and after you add 1 to your roster, the GM is supposed to assign one of 7 abilities to them. Only one of your epic heroes can have a Crusade ability. This is really more about doing historical recreations than choosing your own adventure, though some of the agendas thankfully key off of killing epic heroes, which is a plus. We're not really fans of epic heroes in Crusade. They tend to defeat the purpose of building your own characters using the upgrades and tools at your disposal, plus it's just kind of lame if 3 Marnius's Calgar are running around the planet. These rules seem designed to let named characters get in on a little more of the fun of a campaign, and we suppose it's fine for players who feel stuck taking a character like Angron or Leontis in their army to avoid getting tabled, but we just as soon leave them on the shelf, or if their usage counts as, just let them go on without upgrades. Finally, there's the missions. Nachmund offers 15 in total, 3 of which are designed for big honkin' onslaught games. The remainder are designed primarily for Strike Force, but are billed as playable in Incursion as well. While 10th edition Incursion games use the same board size as Strike Force, if you're going smaller, you'll need to redraw the maps a little bit. It won't take a ton of work to condense them, and hey, it's narrative, you can afford to fudge it a little. The Strike Force missions in Nachmund Gauntlet come in 2 varieties. The first 6 have symmetrical layouts and objectives, while the latter 6 are asymmetrical and likely to give the attacker the choice of who gets to take the first turn. We've already mentioned that these missions are pretty low scoring. Most progressive objectives only award 1 to 2 victory points per objective marker held or action done, and games end when a player becomes the first to 10 points. There are still some endgame objectives in the mix, but most are progressive, and we suspect that many Nachmund games will end early. About half of the missions award the winner 1 strategic asset point. From a player standpoint, the symmetrical missions are set up similar to standard match play missions, just with fewer points scored. There's a version of Scorched Earth, a version of Supply Drop, and a version of Unexploded Ordnance, and that last one, Heralds of Vengeance, is just as much of a stinker here as it is in the tournament pack. The asymmetrical set are more in line with the missions we've seen in the last 2 Crusade books. There's a Sabotage mission where you're doing actions on objective markers and removing them, a pair of crazy Linebreaker missions, and one that has you searching objectives. In several of these, the attacker chooses who goes first, and those missions will generally align with situations where the attacker will be starting on the back foot from a deployment and mission standpoint. As always, we recommend having a lot of terrain on every table you play, with ample spots to hide. There's no moral superiority to be gained on playing on Planet Bowling Ball, just because not every battlefield is covered. Warhammer is a game first and foremost, and it should be fun for both players. Nachmund Gauntlet is a pretty wild departure from prior books, and we're here for it. Crusade is a great place to play with a completely different set of 40k rules, and having multiple waves of your army gives players a reason to smash that increase supply limit button, and think strategically about how they build and field their armies. The strategic site system is an interesting way to introduce a light version of a map campaign, and you'll want to have at least one map sicko in each team to act as War Master, so they can get a kick out of scheming around SAP allocation. We're also big fans of Deep Strike mishaps returning, and the implementation of surgical deep strikes is pretty cool. On the whole, we like this book. though we do worry that the campaign is a bit too complicated and the missions are extremely intertwined with that campaign system, making it difficult to use if you aren't going all in. The good news is that we'll be adding support for Nachmund Gauntlet in Administratum soon, so if you want an easier way to run it and track everything, we'll have you covered. If you'd like to go fist deep into the Nachmund Gauntlet, head on over to Goonhammer.com where we go into even more detail. If you like what we do and want access to even more features in Administratum, please consider supporting us on Patreon. I've been my original character, Marniomic Caligari, deep strike mishapping straight into the recycling bin. Thanks for watching.